Afternoon. It's great to have you here. Welcome to the John M. Olin School of Business here at Washington University in St. Louis. My name is Mark Taylor. I'm the Dean of the Olin Business School, and it's really wonderful to welcome you to this event co-organized between our own Bauer Center for Ethical Leadership and EO. We have an absolutely outstanding panel lined up this evening, as some of you are aware. We have an outstanding speaker in a moment, Stuart Bunderson, one of our top professors. But I just want to reflect to you a little bit on the way that we are thinking about values in the school. I've only been dean here since last December, and by now you probably noticed I don't come from this part of the world, right? But something I did notice when I came here for interview was what a wonderful sense of community there is here. What a sort of wonderful set of values, in a sense, that I felt in interacting with various people I met, which was key to me wanting to come to St. Louis, key to me wanting to come to Washington University and be part of this great business school. And that to me is very important. You'll see we have values written up on big banners upstairs in the foyer. Integrity, collaboration, diversity, excellence, and leadership, I suppose, which it comes out of all of those. And we're going through a strategic planning process at the moment where we want to think about putting values at the center of everything we do in the business school. So values are very, very important to us. That integrity, ethical leadership is extremely important, the bedrock of any successful business career. And I'm interested in listening to the panel, how that informs founders and entrepreneurs, and what exactly values are. And these are sort of deep philosophical issues. I think perhaps Stuart will inform us a little bit about that. But I am delighted to be opening the agenda. Welcome. It falls to me to introduce Stuart Bunderson. Stuart is the George and Carol Bauer Professor in Organizational Ethics and Governance. He's the co-director of the Bauer Leadership Center and also Associate Dean and Director of our Executive Programs. He has published extensively award-winning research on issues of leadership and meaningful work. And he has also extensive consultancy experience as well as industrial experience before coming into academia. Tonight he's discussing the value of values for founders and entrepreneurs, I understand, yeah? So, Stuart.
Well, good afternoon. Can you hear me? Oh, you can hear me. Well, on behalf of the Bauer Leadership Center, let me just say how excited we are to be partnering with Entrepreneurs Organization and the Olin Executive Programs on this exciting event. This is a topic that we feel very strongly about, that we think is very timely, very important. And more than that, we've got this amazing panel of people who have rich experience in this space, and we're just really, really excited to hear from them. So I see my role today as really just setting the stage so that we can get to this panel and have them reflect on this question of values. So I'm going to just sort of lay a little bit of the groundwork and maybe raise some of the issues that then will be explored by our panelists in just a minute. And here are really the two questions that I might touch on just a little bit and give us a little way of thinking about this. Do values matter for startups? If so, how? And how might founders and entrepreneurs build a value-centered enterprise? So let me start by going a little high level. Let's talk about the sort of classic strategic alignment model. If you were to ask somebody, so what does an entrepreneur do? You might get an answer like this. Well, an entrepreneur looks at the realities of the market. They identify a need. Maybe it's a customer need. Maybe it's an unmet customer need. Maybe it's a space that hasn't been tapped. Maybe it's a technology that could be a game changer in a particular space. And then they also identify the constraints, the competitors that might already be working to meet that need. And then looking at that, they identify a strategy, a business plan, and put together an organization that can realize those opportunities. And if they do that right, if you get that sort of fit right, then you make a lot of money. sort of the classic strategic alignment model, which is obviously a simplified entrepreneurship 101, right? This is a simple version of what an entrepreneur does. The problem with that model is it overlooks the reality that for a lot of entrepreneurs, there are other considerations that they want to maximize besides just financial performance. It may be that for them, performance is something more than just financial. It might be, there's a cause that I really want to address in starting this company. It may be that, yeah, sure, I want to make a lot of money, but in the process, I'd like to build an organization that embodies values that I really care about. And if we're going to get there, in other words, if we're going to think about performance more broadly, we've got to add another box to our little equation here. We've got to think about organizational values. And as we're doing that sort of strategic alignment process, we've got to be taking those values into account. So what are those values? What are values? What are organizational values, and what role do they play? Well, let me give you just a couple of definitions here. Organizational values are the principles and standards that guide members' conduct as they pursue organizational objectives. In other words, organizational values are, a lot of people think of them as the how. As we're going about executing our business plan, how are we going to conduct ourselves? How do we want to treat one another? How do we want to treat our customers? How do we want people to think about us in our organization? That's the world of values. Now, in talking about values, we have to acknowledge that values can be explicit. You could have a written value statement that you put on the wall that says, we aspire to be this kind of organization. We customer-oriented, transparent, nimble, and innovative, or whatever it might be. You've seen a lot of these. Or it could be that those values are not explicitly laid out in a value statement, but they're implicit. They're simply the unwritten rules that everybody knows that at this organization, this is the way we do things because we've sort of evolved over time, and that's the way that we've come to operate. We've never formalized those into a statement, but that's just kind of the way that we operate. Now, because of that, if you think about how do people learn values, stakeholders, whether those stakeholders are employees of the company, whether they are investors, whether they're customers, learn about the values of an organization by watching what is practiced, rewarded, punished, and reinforced and celebrated in the context of that organization, regardless of what is officially stated, regardless of what is on the wall. What a company does and the decisions they make speak a lot more loudly than whatever value statement they may have on the wall. And then one final point about values. Values are the fundamental building blocks of an organization's culture. If you scratch the surface of organizational culture to ask what's underneath, you're going to find values. These are the things that we believe and aspire to uphold. Okay, so that's organizational values. So let's go back to our little model here. What happens when you add values to this sort of classic strategic alignment model? Well, one of the things that happens is that you're more likely to realize performance objectives that go beyond just financial performance. If you've got a set of values that are clearly articulated about the kind of company you want to be, the kind of outcomes you want to have, the kind of problems that you want to solve in society, you're more likely to get there if you're clear on your organizational values. You're more likely to have a broad sense of what performance looks like. But there's another element here. When you throw values into the mix, you actually add an additional constraint. A priori values impose a constraint on how an organization can respond to those market realities. You're basically saying, this is the kind of company we want to be. So even though there may be certain opportunities in the market, some of those we will pursue and some of those we won't, and some of those we'll pursue in a different way than some others might because we have a goal of the kind of company that we want to be. Now, if that's the case, it raises a few, I think, interesting questions for an entrepreneur. One is, if that's the case and values impose an additional constraint, then, wow, I don't know if I want an additional constraint as I'm trying to just scramble to meet some need in the market and make payroll. So maybe I'm better off not explicitly managing values, but letting that evolve. And then I can turn around at some point and look back and see what my values are, and I'll articulate it that way. So are you better off just letting them emerge, or should you manage them? Number two, can values be a source of competitive advantage? Not just a constraint, but can they also be something that gives me a source of competitive advantage, or perhaps even disadvantage? And finally, how do you define and defend values in the face of real performance pressures? So I'm not going to answer all these questions, but what I'd like to do instead is kind of give us a way of thinking about some of the issues that arise and give you a way of thinking about how these questions play out in real organizations. So what I'd like to do is give you a few examples, look at a few prominent examples, and highlight how values fed through some of those cases. And then we'll draw a few takeaways at the end, and we'll turn the time over to the panel to help us kind of wrestle with these things. So first example, Uber. A company that's been in the news a lot lately because of values. We all know the story. Uber was founded in 2009 by Garrett Camp and Travis Kalanick, both of whom were previously successful as entrepreneurs. Just a wonderful story of disruption. One of the most disruptive tech startups in history, currently valued at about $70 billion. But what I'd like to focus on is the fact that throughout their history, Uber has repeatedly found themselves embroiled in controversies that people are ascribing to company values. They keep saying, yeah, Uber keeps getting themselves in hot water because of their values. Things like lawsuits alleging fraudulent pricing, accusation of inadequate safety, allegations of sexual harassment. That's the one that kind of the top came off with that one. That came out earlier this year. And then an F rating, for heaven's sakes, from the Better Business Bureau. That doesn't sound like a company that's got it all together. And so a lot of people are saying, you know, this is the Uber's struggling because they have these dysfunctional values. Dysfunctional values, what does that look like? Well, let's look at Uber's values and let's see if we can figure out if they're dysfunctional. Here's their values. Super pumpedness. Probably a word that not a lot of you had heard if you haven't seen Uber's values. Always be hustling. Let builders build. Meritocracy and toe-stepping. Principled confrontation, making bold bets. Celebrate cities. Make magic, inside out. Optimistic leadership. Being yourself. Own, don't rent. Champions mindset. Obsession with the customer. Okay. If somebody came to me, if I didn't know anything about Uber's background, and somebody came to me and they showed me Uber's 14 values, and they said, what do you think of these values? I would not immediately say, this is a very, very sick company. Right? What I would say is, wow, some of these are kind of unusual. I might say, these are a lot of values here. 14 is a lot. A lot of companies will try and do something a little more manageable. I might say some of these are not really values. They sound more like strategic priorities. But I don't think I would say, this is a sick company. And any company that espouses these values is going to run into problems. Okay, so what's the problem? Why are people saying that Uber's values are so problematic? Well, the reality is that these values were not articulated at Uber until 2015, 6 years after they were founded. And they were rolled out by Travis Kalanick at a big off-site retreat in Las Vegas, a big lavish retreat. Beyonce was on the docket, and he dressed up in a white lab coat and talked about, you know, the science behind these values, and then he rolled out these values. The problem is, by then, Uber had 6 years where they were developing how they were going to think about things like this. They had their own take on these values long before Kalanick stood up there and told people these are our values. And their take on these values, in many cases, was a little problematic. So, for example, look at this one. Champions mindset was one of their values. Well, at Uber, what does that really mean? Win at all costs. So champions mindset sounds okay, but at Uber, it took a certain form. This one here, always be hustling. Sounds okay. At Uber, that also meant ready, fire, aim. And they did a lot of things that they had to sort of clean up after the fact. Meritocracy and toe-stepping. Sounds okay. You know, we reward those people who are really smart. Well, that led to a couple of problems. It led to this very politically aggressive culture. Backstabbing, an ugly sort of dog-eat-dog kind of environment. Hobbesian environment is what a lot of articles would describe it as. But it also led to sort of this what many people have called kind of a bro culture at Uber, where women were not treated well. And that came out a little earlier this year. So in other words, Uber had these values. You just look at these values, well, they seem like, okay, whatever, they could go in any direction. But they had enacted those values. Remember, it's not just what you say, it's how you actually act that defines your values. They had defined those values in a way that ended up being pretty problematic. And so you hear people saying things like, the negative reputation stems from Uber's corporate values, former employees and others in the tech industry said. For many, company values are the kind of corporate speak that rarely interferes with one's day-to-day work environment. But at Uber, the emphasis on hustling, toe-stepping, and meritocracy took on a more sinister aspect in the workplace. Everyone used those values to excuse their bad behavior, said one former Uber employee. So in other words, these values stuck. They meant something. People knew what they were, and they used them. But they used them in many cases to justify behavior that got Uber into a lot of trouble. And it's not, I think, a stretch to say that Uber's toxic values have actually stalled, at a minimum, their historic momentum. Here are some things that we're hearing now from the industry. Here's a tech analyst. With all the turmoil inside Uber, it's unlikely that MIFT shareholders will get an offer that's close to Uber's current valuation. Currently valued about $70 billion. This analyst said they'd be lucky to get 50 to 55 billion for the company. So they're saying, and why is that? Because things are kind of crazy and chaotic inside the company. A manager from another tech firm, to be perfectly honest, I don't want to work with someone who did well in that environment. And here's a talent manager. This is a moment, and this was said in March of this year, when people are thinking long and hard about whether they want to be in that culture. So in other words, the bottom line, Uber has lost the respect and confidence of many key stakeholders. And that lack of, or loss of respect and confidence has real implications for the momentum that Uber has in the market and can continue to build. All right, so example number one. Example number two, Infosys. For those of you not familiar with Infosys, most of you have probably heard of this company. A global technology services company based in Bangalore, India, offices all over the world. Founded in 1981 by Narayana Murthy and 6 colleagues who scraped together $250 to found this new company. The company now employs over 193,000 people, makes about $10 billion in annual revenue. But what Infosys is also known for is doing it in the right way. And look at some of these awards. 14-time winner of the Most Admired Knowledge Enterprise Award. 11-time winner of the Most Admired Company Award. In other words, people see Infosys as a company that's, they're growing, they're successful, they're innovative, they're doing things in the right way. Most admired doesn't mean necessarily that we admire your values. It simply means you're a really well-run company. Not only on the strategy and organization side, but also on the way that you garner respect from different stakeholders. So let's dig back into their founding story a little bit. Infosys was founded in May of 1981. Narayana Murthy and his 6 co-founders crowded into the bedroom of his tiny apartment in Mumbai and to talk about their vision for a new software company. And let's listen to what read what Murthy had to say about that little interaction. He says, one of us suggested that we should try to become India's largest software company. Someone else said that our goal should be to become the country's biggest job creator. A third opinion was that we should strive to be the software firm with the highest market cap. When my turn came, I pushed back on those ideas, saying, why don't we aim to be India's most respected company? After much discussion, we agreed to create a values-based organization. The vision statement we drafted that night was to be India's most respected company, delivering best-of-breed technology solutions and employing best-in-class professionals. So in other words, from the very beginning, Infosys had a goal of including and incorporating in a very explicit way key organizational values into their thinking, design, and execution of that organization, because they had some goals, performance goals, that were beyond just financial. So specifically, they wanted to be India's most respected company. They then articulated a set of values, 5, which is a little more manageable than 14, which they articulated in a little acronym, C-Life: client focus, leadership by example, integrity and transparency, fairness and excellence. And they said, this is the kind of company we want to be right out of the gate. We want to be the kind of company that has respect, and we're a values-based company. But now they have a problem because they've got to somehow, these values have to work in the market. So let's talk about the market for just a minute. Here's a graph of Indian software exports between 1980 and 2015. I think we all know that over the past decade plus, Indian companies have really dominated in this space. And you can see the exponential growth here starting maybe in 2001. But this is where we are. This is where Infosys is, 1981, Murthy and 6 colleagues in a little apartment deciding they want to be a values-based company. And here you've got some high growth, but you have these companies and this, the potential that these companies in India might have was really sort of unknown and unexplored. And that's the environment that Murthy and colleagues are getting together in and deciding we want to be a values-based company. So let's look at kind of what those market realities how we might characterize those. You've got growing demand for outsourced tech at that time. You've got Indian IT firms that are largely unknown, including, of course, Infosys, as they're just getting started. And yet you have many of these firms engaging in unethical practices, bribery, fudging invoices, which lowered their costs. Okay, so these are some of the realities of the market. Here are some of the values that Infosys is trying to espouse. You can see right off there are going to be a few conflicts with the realities of the market. But is there an opportunity for those values to actually give them a competitive advantage? Well, here's what they did. They actually used their values to help them establish trusted partnership with blue chip clients for whom ethics were a high priority. We want somebody, you're kind of unknown, you guys are all kind of unknown. We want somebody who we know we can trust to be a partner that does things the right way. And so that helped them to actually establish out of the gate, some trusted partnership with blue chip clients. But at the same time, they had to exit some sectors where a hard line on ethics created a strong disadvantage. In other words, their values were a constraint, but they also provided an opportunity. Let me give you some examples of how that tension played out at Infosys. Early on in the life of the company, they were importing an expensive new super mini computer into India. It got held up at the customs office. And the customs officer said, you know what, you're going to have to help me out here. In other words, he's asking for a bribe. Or if not, you're going to have to pay a 135% customs duty. 135%, which is a bogus duty. So bribe me, and I'll let it go through. Or 135%, basically you're paying for this thing twice. They didn't even have that money. So what did they do? Solution, they refused to pay the bribe. They paid that bogus 135% customs duty, and they took out a loan to do it. Another example, companies in the packaged software business in India were manipulating invoices to avoid paying heavy customs duties again. So if Infosys wants to compete in that space, they've got to have really, really low costs, or there's just no way that they can compete with these people. I mean, 135% on these as well. So what did they decide to do? They exited the packaged software space. There's just no way that they could compete there. Another one, CIO from a potential client, $1 million deal, says, you know what, I like it, like everything, you get me a car, you got the deal. So $20,000, $30,000 on a car, and they get a $1 million contract. So again, you got some values that you're going to do things the right way. What are you going to do? Their solution was they declined the bribe. They actually still got the deal in that case. And then one final example, a key project manager intentionally fudged a taxi bill to the tune of $40. $40. Now, Infosys had a zero tolerance policy. So they could have said, you know what, slap your hand, that's not how we do things at Infosys. Next time you do it, you're going to be in serious trouble. But because of the zero tolerance policy, they let him go. In other words, you look at this and you can see this was not easy. They could articulate these values, but unless they could defend those values in the face of strong, strong performance pressures, some of these pressures could actually sink the company. They went ahead and went with values, and that says more than any value statement on the wall. Here's the way that Murthy said it. When you say that you are committed to values, it implies that you are willing to pay a price for them. Otherwise, there is no meaning in saying that you're a values-driven company. Okay, so let's see if we can go back to Uber. And could Uber learn anything from this example of Infosys that we just went through? As you know, last month, Uber hired a new CEO, Dara Khosrowshahi. He's got a few things he has to do. Here's his to-do list. I got a hold of his to-do list. It looks like this. Stop the talent bleed, including exec level, and reassure the talent market that Uber can be a great place to work. Reassure a very uneasy board of directors. Restore investor and customer confidence. All right, now there may be a number of ways of doing that, but I would propose that at the core of any solution that's going to be lasting for Uber, values should be front and center. He needs to instill a responsible set of values that can regain the confidence and respect of key stakeholders while preserving the good elements of what was. We shouldn't throw Uber's values completely under the bus. They had some values that were really, really functional for an aggressive startup. They're very aggressive folks, very innovative. You want to preserve some of that while at the same time establishing some responsible values that are going to restore confidence and trust among these key stakeholders. All right, so what are some takeaways? Let me articulate a few takeaways, and then we'll turn the time over to our panel to kind of dig into these issues much more deeply. First takeaway, core values can help you carve out a distinctive and difficult to replicate position in the market. We saw that happen with Infosys. Core values can promote or they can undermine appropriate behavior toward and respect from key stakeholders, such as your customers, your employees, your investors, and society. We saw that in Uber. Founders and founding leaders define values through key decisions, especially those decisions that sacrifice short-term performance for longer-term character. Those character-defining commitments that commit resources and that are made when short-term performance is so tempting and right in front of you are the ones that really define values and culture. And finally, if you want to build a business that embodies your core values, you need to be acting on those values right from the start. So, bottom line, values matter. They should be in the equation from the beginning. And if they're not, it's unlikely we're going to reach that goal of having performance that's evaluated along more than just financial dimensions. Hopefully we can keep this conversation going. Here are a couple of ways to do so. We've got our Twitter. We've got the hashtag values-based leadership. Visit our website. We want to continue to have conversations about these issues. But more importantly, we're going to have a conversation right here and now with an amazing panel of people. So let me introduce Cliff Holtkamp, who's going to be coming up here in just a minute to be our moderator. Cliff is the academic director for entrepreneurship here at Olin, senior lecturer in entrepreneurship, and also an entrepreneur in his own right. So let me turn the time over to him, and he'll give us an introduction to the panel.
Very nice. Well done.
Yeah.
Come on up.
In particular order?
Yeah. Thank you, Stuart, for getting this conversation started. That was really excellent and gave us a lot to think about. I think one of the most interesting things about being an entrepreneur is that you have the opportunity for your company to be an extension of yourself. And what that means is that your company can be a reflection of your own values. And I think Stuart showed very well how that can be something that can be to your advantage, or maybe in the case of certain unnamed Uber CEOs, might be to your disadvantage. I think we have 5 entrepreneurs in the panel today who those personal values have worked to the advantage of their companies. They were all handpicked from the local community as companies that was clear to outsiders that they operated differently than other companies in their field, that there was something distinctive about these organizations. And it just happened to be that every one of them had a corporate culture that was very much an extension of the founders of the business, and we believe is a part of the recipe of their success. So maybe what we'll do is we'll go through the group, and first I'll ask everybody to give a brief introduction to the origin of their business and how it was founded and how they are, what they are doing today. And then I'll come back around and ask about what those values are that are distinctive to your organization. So Jennifer, would you please start off in telling us a little bit about Cotton Babies and how that got started?
Sure, thanks, Cliff. My name is Jennifer Labie. I'm the founder and creator of Cotton Babies. We created a brand called Bum Genius, which some of you may know as a cloth diaper. It's the #1 selling brand of cloth diapers in North America. We have also been the best-selling brand in Europe until some legislation changed in Europe a few years back, and then that changed for us. but we manufacture our diapers here locally, and we employ about 90 people right now.
And is this something that just came to the top of your head one day? Or what created the origin for this business? How did you recognize this opportunity?
We started our business with about $100 15 years ago. My husband and I were choosing between diapers and food. The choice to cloth diaper our baby was really about needing to eat. We had to eat. There wasn't enough money to both buy disposable diapers and groceries. We started with $100, and we literally bootstrapped the company from that point. We realized other people like us were buying cloth diapers, and slowly built a business from that point and built it into what it is today.
It's amazing. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
Brian Matthews?
Hi, I'm Brian Matthews. I'm co-founder of Cultivation Capital, and Cultivation Capital is a venture capital firm that started in 2012. And there wasn't many venture capital firms in St. Louis when we started, and creating a venture capital firm, raising the money and making the proper decisions can be difficult. And I had always believed that you're better with a team of co-founders. And so the first thing we set out to do was select the co-founders to launch the company, and Cliff Holtkamp is actually one of our co-founders.
His value is wisdom, by the way, if you're wondering.
We set about to start with one fund, and we now have 5 funds and about $125 million under management, and 28 general partners, or 28 partners around the table. And I'll speak more to my belief on co-founders and ownership.
Great, thank you. Aaron?
My name is Aaron Perlett, and I'm a co-founder of a marketing communications firm called Elasticity, which is based purely on super pumpedness. Really? We were founded, January 1 will be 9 years for us, so about 8.5 years. My partners and I were all at Fleischman Hillard, and marketing communications was changing dramatically at the time, and we had a different vision for where we thought our space was going, that we think ultimately proved to be right, focusing on creating really great disruptive content, and then taking an integrated approach to delivering that content to try to drive something, whether you're trying to shape reputation, drive sales, and the advertising and marketing and PR space back in the 80s had actually been what's called unbundled. They had taken all the different pieces of marketing and moved them all into separate agencies, and we saw the need to actually bring it all into one small boutique shop. And so the 3 of us started almost 9 years ago. Today we're about 33 people here in St. Louis principally, but in Dallas and Chicago and Connecticut as well.
Thank you. Joe Edwards?
Hi, I'm Joe Edwards. I opened Blueberry Hill, a restaurant and music club in the Delmar Loop area in 1972, and realized really quickly that if I didn't work on the area in general, that I wouldn't succeed in that first week, and slowly started to organize the people in the area that were still there, because the area had been in great decline for a couple of decades, especially the most recent decade at that time, and try to start getting people to work together to slowly rebuild and reclaim the city street that had gone down like a lot of other city streets around the country. Little by little it worked. I went from just a little 2-room place to now the whole city block, and I just went on from there little by little to save other buildings that might have been torn down, like the Tivoli Theater building, and then try to create unique places in the loop that would just add something that other areas in the city didn't have. It's real important to keep the theater and do it first class so it would last a long time. So I don't do as many projects as some people do, but I try to build them in a good way that people want to keep coming back and feel comfortable for a couple hours and put their troubles behind them. And so now I have been for quite a while the chairman of both business districts. It's crazy we have to have 2, but that's where the state law is, city-county divide. We're bridging that artificial city-county border in the Delmar Loop, and now it's been designated one of the 10 great streets in America.
Wow.
By the American Planning Association, not just by me. I always say that I'm a shameless promoter.
Andy Simon?
Thank you very much for having me here. I'm a corporate anthropologist, and I launched my business in 2002 after watching 9/11. Prior to that, I was in corporations for 20 years, mostly to help them change as an executive. They really didn't know I was an anthropologist. And before that, I was a professor. I got my tenure. I did television series. But I got into business to apply the tools, the method, and theory of anthropology so business could appreciate how observational research and ethnographic work could help them see, feel, and think in new ways. And I say those words often because how we see something will help us determine how we're going to do something. But when I launched my company as a corporate anthropologist that helps you change, I realized that nobody hired me as an anthropologist. They hired me because they had to change. They were stalled or stuck. And we picked up some large companies right away. And we had to teach them how to be more entrepreneurial, step out, observe, go exploring, and apply the methods and tools that you might use in Samoa to a place that was Markel paper. And what I learned was that companies are really small-scale societies. They have kinship and rituals and face painting and potlatches. They just don't know they do. And their customers do as well. I will tell you that what I've done over the last 15 years is built a business to help make anthropology of value to business. When I launched it, if you searched corporate anthropology, I bet you didn't have 5 people looking for it. Today we have a lot more, and we show up on Google's homepage. We spend a tremendous amount of time pleasing Google and hoping that people are searching as well. But on the other side of it, we are doing a lot of work with business to try and make them understand why anthropologists and anthropology can help them grow in innovative ways. The worst major you can take today is anthropology. It's the #1 worst major because you can't find a job. I don't think the problem is anthropology. I think it's business that doesn't understand the values of it. I'm mentoring people across the world. I'm going to Bahrain in January. We're mentoring people in Africa, Mexico, Amsterdam, on how to launch a business to be a corporate anthropologist, and they're beginning to actually work. And here we have podcasts and all kinds of other things. We speak widely. I've done 350 workshops on it. But I will tell you that people hire us because they need to change, not because we're anthropologists. And so for my values, my passion is really how do I turn a very stuffy discipline into something that's much more accessible for people who really need it. And when they see, feel, and think in a new way, they have an epiphany, and they go, that's what you're talking about. I said, no, that's what you're seeing. And all of a sudden, off they go. And so I wrote a book a year ago about how anthropology can help your business grow. It sold out. I won an award. But more often than not, it's just people read it and come back and say, can you do that for me? And more times than not, I get a smile because that's the whole point of our business is to help bring a little anthropology into business. So.
Thank you. So, Jennifer, I think a lot of us know the Cotton Babies brand, even if we're personally not users. It's one that everyone knows. And that brand is so well known, not just for the environmental sustainability part of that brand, but also it just seems to really speak to maternity. Can you speak a little, are those values that are strong in your organization? It looks like it from the outside. Are there others? Can you speak a little bit about how your company is a reflection and an extension of yourself?
So I've built my business with my babies around my feet. So I started it with an 8-week-old baby. And wow. I'm walking down the street with my baby in a sling, and I get stopped by all these different women who want to buy the sling that my baby's in. And that's literally what I started selling out of my diaper bag to women in the mall and the church nursery. And there's actually somebody in the room, his wife bought one of my first slings years and years and years ago. And because my babies were always around my feet, as we hired employees, it was important to me that the women and even the men that we hired were allowed to bring little babies, not mobile babies, but little babies with them to work. So when our employees have babies, we will allow them to bring those kids to work with them until they're mobile. Once they start to move, they have to go to daycare, but until they're mobile, they can come to work. And what that does is it actually elongates for our moms who choose to breastfeed. It elongates the breastfeeding relationship. And we've had close to 100 babies at this point in time who have come to work at Cotton Babies, both in our retail store and in our offices. And it's created some really interesting conversations around culture because we've realized that as guests come into our workspace, they expect chaos. They expect that it's going to be loud, that it's going to be this place, that it's going to be like a nursery or a daycare. Well, it's not at all. Usually we only have one, maybe two, at most three. There'll be three little people around. And remember, they're not mobile, and most of the time they're asleep. But they expect it to be crazy, and it's really not. It's actually really very peaceful. And it challenges their own culture, because we've realized that we go to work to get away from kids. And because we actually give women and our men permission to be able to be a parent and think at the same time, to be able to be a contributing member of society and a parent at the same time, it gives them an interesting freedom to stretch themselves. And it's created, I have such loyalty in my staff. I have some people, I've got one mom, she's had 3 kids so far. And I had one mom, she was with me from the time she was a teenager. She left me for a little while. She had her first baby, she came back, and she said 2 more since she came back. And it's just been lovely to watch that culture continue to grow. So it's incredible.
You can absolutely tell that the core of your business really came from mothers. That just the whole feels different than other businesses that were started in boardrooms. It's really interesting. Was the environmental benefits of your products, is that really a side benefit that really came from that was what was best for the children, or was that also another interest of yours?
Because for me, cloth diapers were about food. My core value has been about making sure that families get to eat. So as the business grew, looking back at who I was when we started our company, I knew that we needed to make sure that we were taking care of who I was, because I was that mom, right, who was choosing between diapers and food. Fully 1 out of 3 moms today is choosing between diapers and food. It's been studied multiple times. It's even by Yale repeated this research. And what we do today is we've actually got a national diaper bank network that takes care of those moms, and we give those moms 15 cloth diaper changes. It's through a network of diaper banks that's all volunteer-led, and that's how we make sure that we take care of making sure that moms don't have to choose between diapers and food. So the environmental piece is a great secondary benefit, and while I appreciate the fact that cloth diapers offset that environmental impact of disposable diapers, for me personally, the value is making sure that families get to have enough food to feed their kids. Because really, if you all think about how you make decisions, your personal economies and getting to eat is your first priority.
Interesting. So Brian, Cultivation Capital just doesn't look like other companies. And I get that comment all the time that there just seems to be something different. Most venture funds will get 2 or 3 partners. They'll hire 1 employee. They'll earn a lot of income on fees, and try to keep it all to themselves. And they also usually have 1 or 2 funds, and then they close. And then they all retire, and there's not really a legacy left behind. Your vision from the beginning was very different for Cultivation Capital. Was that on purpose, or was that really something that just happened organically because it was who you were?
Oh, I'd like to say it was on purpose. I'm not sure it was. I think from the beginning, we knew we wanted to build something that was sustainable, and that this was probably going to be the last company I built, so I was thinking more philosophically maybe, and wanted to create something that would last longer than 1 or 2 funds. So to do that, in the venture capital business, a fund lasts 10 to 12 years, so it's a very long commitment. And if you're going to create something that has stay power, you've got to build an organization that can grow and pass down a lot of the tribal knowledge. So I knew it had to be a larger group of partners that had various skills. And you know, just the collaboration that is needed in venture capital, and the partnership and the way venture capital works is such a collaborative thing that the more people around the table was ultimately going to increase our chances for success. So I think the other thing that was really important to me is that we were all at the same level and we were all co-founders, and that we all had equal power and decision making, and we set the rules in place that any partner could veto the decisions. And I think being equal and working collaboratively was going to be an inviting area as we tried to grow this to get more partners involved.
Did you ever think to yourself, wow, maybe I deserve more, I could get more? Was that just unthinkable to you, or is that something that you really made a conscious decision?
I think when we first started, maybe the first few months, I wasn't thinking that way, but it quickly became, if I really wanted buy-in and I really wanted ownership, that we all had to be equal. And so never, I would say after the first few months and a few conversations, it became obvious that we all were in this together and we all had to work towards the success, and that we would win or fail together and as equal partners.
That's great. Aaron, I think most of us in this room remember your famous manifesto of St. Louis doesn't suck, and that really, and it doesn't, and that really put your firm, I think when it was still relatively young, really out in the forefront, got a lot of attention. I thought it was interesting because it was obvious that campaign wasn't meant to give your firm attention. It was just meant because you were passionate about your city and had this commitment, this civic commitment, and that's still such a big part of the way you operate your business. Is that, how do you kind of define that commitment to the city, that civic engagement, and how does that work its way through your organization?
So, of our three partners, I'm the only one who's actually not from here, because I grew up in the DC area. I moved here 12 years ago, but both of my other partners are from Metro St. Louis. But we've always felt it was a big part of our charter. I don't think it was emblazoned into our kind of values necessarily, but it was always kind of an unstated aspect of what we wanted to do and what we wanted to build. We felt like, we all had families. We all felt like if we could build a company here and excel here, and we could help this region excel, that it would be good for everyone that worked for us, be good for everyone around us. It's one of the things I find so frustrating about St. Louis is that it's such a parochial region in so many ways that people really like to stake out their territory and not want to really play well together. And we didn't really care much about that. We tried to do things and invest our own money in, building a piece of software that was meant to help create ideas and fund ideas to help the region. We invested a lot of our time in trying to help drive economic development and recruit entrepreneurs here. So I think that's something that's more evolved into something that's become an important part of the agency and of our DNA. But it wasn't necessarily something that we set out to. It just, we all kind of grew this passion for it, recognizing that it was good for all of us and all of those around us.
I think those activities definitely demonstrated that your firm had leadership in the community. Did you see that also led to more business, or did you feel that was just something that you did because that you had to do? But did you actually those activities, which took away a lot of your time and attention, still do you feel that actually added to the bottom line, or was that just more of a personal satisfaction?
Without question, it added to the bottom line. We have spent, I think, 5 years working with building the brand of Cortex. We've spent the last 4 or 5 years managing something called Accelerate St. Louis, which means that we're responsible for the reputation of the startup community here. People here locally, Brian and I were talking about this earlier, people here locally often don't see the impact of that because we're not really targeting people here locally. We're trying to get our message of this region and the startups here in front of VCs in Silicon Valley or Boston or New York. So it certainly had an impact on our bottom line.
That's awesome. So Joe, there's no question if someone drives down the loop, they can tell what property is yours and what property might be somebody else's. They all speak that same brand, even though they're completely different brands. They're completely different types of establishments. You can tell that it's got a Joe Edwards mark on it. There's some type of a nostalgia, or a love of nostalgia, a love of that rock and roll lifestyle. Can you explain a little bit more about what it is about yourself that makes such a distinctive difference for all of your businesses?
Well, I love neon signs.
That's right.
And just they're pieces of artwork on the street, in my opinion. Yeah, I can't put my finger on it, but I just like things that make people smile. So I unboxed my collections in the early days and filled Blueberry Hill up with them, programmed the jukebox. Just wanted nice people to be in there. In fact, I banned 2/3 of the customers and almost went out of business 3 times in the first 2 years because of doing that, but I was not going to put up with the outlaw motorcycle gangs. I like motorcycle people, but just wanted everyone to feel welcome. And I think the kinds of signage, the kinds of building designs, even the new ones I built, kind of fit in with the neighborhood and are unique. And I like to welcome all people. Our staff has always reflected that. In fact, before tattoos became a really common thing in society, we had lots and lots of people that had tattoos work there. And several customers actually asked, is that a requirement? Do you have to have a tattoo to work at Blueberry Hill? And it wasn't a requirement, but same way long hair wasn't, but a lot of people had, male and female. But it really helped set a tone for the neighborhood, I think, in a way. And I don't want to take all the credit because a lot of independent business people are part of the whole equation. But the Loop really is a welcoming. It's one of the few neighborhoods in St. Louis that is the way America should be, in my opinion, where people of all economic strata live there and interact. They're $50,000 homes one direction, $1 million homes another. People of all races and ethnic backgrounds work and live in the area. Older people live in the area and interact with college students and high school students. So that age diversity is important too. And you get exposed to everyone's problems and positives. And then you just build a community, and you have a lot of minority-owned businesses, independent ones in the area, as well as a lot of women-owned businesses. And I think that's the legacy of the Loop, really. Just not that it's just a cool, fun area, that the Moonrise Hotel has the world's largest man-made rotating moon, which I love. But I looked at that building plans across my wall over and over and over, and the interior I felt was fine, all that, but it just was too rectangular and not quite right, and it finally hit me. I'm calling it the Moonrise Hotel, so darn it, I'm gonna do like a Daily Planet type of thing. And I think whimsical things like that are part of the Loop too. I think that's why people enjoy it from around the country. They can identify with it, whether they're brand new to St. Louis or have lived here all their lives. And just treating people with the respect and consideration. That's all I've ever tried to do with the people that work with me and that I work with.
So you brought it up. We got to ask a little bit more about kicking out the outlaw bicycle gang, or motorcycle gangs. I mean, that really probably was both a scary thing to do, and you probably were getting a lot of income from that business when you're starting out. So what's a little bit on that story?
It was 2/3 of the business.
Oh my gosh.
But well, there were 2 gangs in St. Louis that were the primary ones, a white gang from the Overland area and a black gang from East St. Louis called the Warlords. The Bone Shakers was the white gang, and they didn't get along, so that was always really dicey if they came in at the same time flying their colors. So little by little, I would just sit down next to them and just not do anything and just sit there so they couldn't work their drug deals and all that without me hearing it. And little by little, it kind of weeded some of them out. But, one day one of the guys from Warlords came in, really nice guy, actually. But he's sitting there and his vest pops open, he has a gun, and this before guns were legal. More sensible time. Sitting there, and he was in a corner too, and I said, you can't come with a gun like this. Oh yeah, Joe, it makes it much safer. I said, how does it make it safer? I said, well, there's a contract out of my life, and they won't get me if they see that I'm packing heat, and they won't do off me in your place. Well, I'm sorry, you have to go. So it took quite a long time to get them out, because other people you could physically, not that I promote that, but every once in a while you have to defend yourself and all. But those guys you couldn't. I mean, it had to be a long process to bore them to death by talking with them or sitting there where they couldn't do their deal. So
you coached them out.
Right, no super pubiness bikers now.
So Andy, we had lunch together earlier today, and you had some interesting stories about when the values of the founding entrepreneur actually came to a point where maybe it got them so far, but then it became an inhibitor. Could you, just to provide some counterpoint, share one of those stories?
Yes, and I love the passion of the values as well as how you manifest them. We often work with early stage companies, entrepreneurs, who have taken it from 0 to 8 million or 10 million and get stalled. And each of them, when we come in to do some work and we spend some time hanging out, what does an anthropologist do? We hang out, and we begin to learn a lot about what's going on, and often there are 2 or 3 recurring themes, one of which is they are so passionate about that product. We had one client who really had an innovative product, but he had a single product, and he worried more about the patent infringements that were going on in China and everywhere else than he was about growing the channels for delivery. And he had no scalability at all, and he was a soloist, which was fine until he realized that he wasn't going anywhere. So scalability is often a question, and then what happens when you start to look at scalability is that the value of being an innovative, visionary entrepreneur, doing the CEO, CFO, CMO, and every other job, is that you need some talent and you need some processes. Worked with another client that they grown the business up into the $60 million range and realized as an entrepreneur they had taken it as far as their talent had gone. When they hired an HR director, they knew they were in trouble. And as they got going, they realized that if they were going to add more staff, everybody couldn't be a freewheeling entrepreneur in the process. They really needed some policies and procedures, which they hated. And you can begin to feel the values. I think the most interesting ones are where they keep the core values of what we believe in, whether it's the integrity or the honesty and all those wonderful InnoSist values, and then begin to change the behaviors to manifest them without losing the values. We're working with another client now that's a $3 billion client globally, and we're working with their Indian CEOs because they are trying to change their culture while keeping the values in place. And it always is this tension between what I believe to be true, the things that I think are important, and how do I actually live it in such a way. So as you were talking about who can come in, even though we're diverse, you can feel the tension between the diversity on the one side and the bikers on the other. And it's never as easy as it might seem. I think it's the solo product companies that really find themselves in most difficulty. The entrepreneurs are so passionate about the factory and what they've made that they forget about the community or the customer and how that's changing and how they have to begin to adapt to that. So we talked about lots of them. I hope those are some, unless you have
Great.
others you
Thank
remember.
We maybe take a couple questions from the audience, if anyone has any of their own follow-up questions. Dean Greenbaum.
These I find rather puzzling. So I'm wondering if you can provide some insight into that, because misogyny seems to me the most difficult issue to understand, particularly when it's expressed through words and behaviors that almost everyone finds odious. And sometimes you find that in organizations that articulate values that we would all applaud.
Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Is that a Stuart question?
So let's leave misogyny aside, but let's talk about the gap between what I believe and what I do, what I value and how I live it, and how hard it is often to keep our organization actually doing what it is that we believe in. I think that the Uber story or any of those, it doesn't matter which ones are, embracing certain kinds of things. Humans are wonderfully creative creatures to give meaning. We're meaning makers, and we give meaning how we wish to. And cultures are also herd animals. and we come together and we begin to share a common language, and we begin to watch others do things, and next thing you know, we have the values on the wall and we're behaving in ways which are antithetical and nobody is correcting. And I think that there are lots of ways to make that culture adhere to the values, but you can't stop for a moment, and you have to continuously remember that humans are often self-serving and do things that make them have a good time, that don't necessarily adhere at all. So the creativity of people is terrific, and you have a set of values you want them to embrace, and it's difficult. We're working now with a group of millennials in a large accounting firm, and they do things very differently than the partners do. And it doesn't matter what, you could talk about misogyny, but if you watch the millennials behave, it's very different than the partners, and the poor Gen Xers are trying to translate so they understand each other. And it's a translation problem, but if you looked at it from a side, they all aren't adhering to the values at all the same way. They have the same values, but it's very different behavior. And the millennials haven't learned how to talk to each other yet, so we're teaching them how to talk.
Joe?
It wasn't just motorcycle people that I banned. It was people that were rude. And when guys would come up to a girl they didn't know and just say, "Hey, baby, you want to?" Well, I said, wait, you can't talk to somebody that way. You don't know her. You're interfering with her night. And to make the neighborhood safe and welcoming to all people, as single women, families with young kids, older adults, anybody, that it was real important. And that was one part of it. Is to just, and I think the Loop in general has always kind of bought into that anyway. It's a very progressive area, but you have to ban them. And I tell you, when you ban somebody that lives right across the street and they're paying rent in an apartment, they can't come in one of the few places in the area at that time, they get awfully mad. But it also sets a tone like, gosh, he really did. And he stuck by that they cannot come in ever. And it was a lifetime ban. Anybody I banned, it's for life. So that's was a pretty strong sentence.
Thank you all for your comments. So my question is, can you elaborate perhaps on a moment where there was dissonance between your articulated values and some of your practices? And then with that in mind, what did you do to rectify that? So I guess the question is really stemming from companies that might have a social justice slant, for example, or might articulate having a value of sustainability, but yet still they might work and manufacture things and not pay people properly. So I guess I'm wondering, in your spheres, where have you noticed any dissonance and what did you do about it, or how did you rectify it?
As far as the pay part?
I guess it's really, did you ever a point where your values were really challenged, and you recognized that there might have been an inconsistency or a hypocrisy, and you either had to correct it or were not able to correct it?
I can speak to the manufacturing piece. So we have worked really hard for a long time to make sure that our manufacturing was done in an ethical way. So making things in the United States has been very important to me. So earlier, Stuart was speaking to these challenges that entrepreneurs face that often create barriers between values and maybe opportunity. So for us, we could have gone to China, and perhaps the decision to make our product in China might have created more profit and could have perhaps created headroom for a company that would have made things a lot easier. And instead, we made manufacturing decisions that cost us more, but produced a higher quality product. And for us, over the last couple of years, has prioritized actually localizing our manufacturing right here in St. Louis. So we actually pay our workers about 20% more than other comparative facilities in St. Louis. And we offer them full-time benefits. They start working for us with 26 paid days of vacation, just like every other full-time employee in our business. We pay for 70% of their health benefits for them and their entire family, regardless of how many children they have. Now, I have people who speak 10 different languages in my building, and often they're refugees. So they may not have any experience in the United States when they come here. They might have only been here a couple of weeks. And often they have very large families. So if they get onto my insurance plan, they're expensive. But we've chosen to do that because for me, it's important that they have good health care. It's an expensive choice, and it drives up the cost of my product, but it means that we get to take care of people and that they're safe and healthy. So those are choices that we've made, and it's created a dissonance, probably not quite the question that you were asking, in that I have to look at people like Stuart and say, yes, I am paying more for my product than I probably have to, and I probably created a more challenging situation for myself competitively than I wish I had, and it keeps me up at night sometimes because I don't have as big of a profit as I would like to have, and I would love to invite you all to shop at Cotton Babies because I would love to have your money in my store. But I'm taking care of people, and I sleep well at night because of that. Does that help? Okay.
Yep. Aaron?
We were, I think it's always been very important for us that we do quality work. Which is, when you're in a creative or a marketing space, it's also very subjective because opinions are what they are. We were working for Best Buy, and Best Buy told us that they wanted us to do something that we knew was counter to the right way to be doing something. And so we had this dilemma. Do we kind of stay and do this kind of mediocre work that we know is not going to be as effective and get to say we work with Best Buy, which, for an agency, a small firm, that's important, really important, because that's how you get more work. And we walked, which really sucked. In similar vein, we were asked by a county government to help lead a anti-STD campaign, but they said they had already developed all the content for it. And so I said, well, can I look at the content? And they were going to hire us. It was done. And so I looked at the content, and I said to them, there's nothing in here that would make me not want to have sex. So there's no way we could have been effective in any way, so we just walked away from it. And, again, we think about feeding ourselves, feeding our families, making sure we can create more jobs all the time, but there's still that kind of balance. If we can't do quality work, it's simply not worth it. And so we've walked away from several of those. I could probably reel off 10 of them.
May I add to your, because you're asking a really powerful question, but as a consultant, I need to make sure that the CEO or whoever hires us trusts that what we're observing adds some value in some fashion. And often I've heard from anthropologists, how do I convince the C-suite that what I've brought to them isn't just a box to check off in some way? And that it requires a lot of balancing because unless they can really understand what you're saying, they don't really understand what you're suggesting. And you can get frustrated as a consultant that the client is the problem, but they're not. And so our own, a part of our own process is to engage them early enough in the discovery so that they begin to see it as well. But it took some time to realize that they weren't stupid clients. And that we had to do a better job of figuring out how to bring them through a process of change. And you can get real frustrated at the stupid client.
I have time for one more question. Jared?
So on the topic of teams, it's very rare to have somebody's values posted on their CVs and their resumes. Can maybe the panel talk about their experience in building teams and trying to select for individuals that share the same values as their organization and not bringing on a toxic individual, which we've all been in that position where it just takes one individual to really kind of sour a group.
Good question.
I'd be happy to start. I'm sure all of us will have things to say. When we're hiring, culture fit is probably above everything else the most important aspect of it. And that doesn't mean you've got to look like someone, sound like someone, find something amusing that other people see. It's more about, do you do good work? But then there's a chemistry aspect of it. You see it, I'm a basketball junkie. NBA GMs, they are chemistry majors because they're building these different pieces that are supposed to fit together. And companies are exactly the same way. And so for us, particularly because we're all very interdependent on one another. There's the client relationship manager who manages that day-to-day relationship with the client, then that person is backed up by a team, and it might be our creative team, and it might be someone who does media relations, or it might be, someone who develops videos, or it might be someone who does search engine optimization. But all those pieces have to fit and have to work together in unison. And to your point, if there's someone that just doesn't quite fit into our cultural DNA, it really can be very, very disruptive. And what we have found organizationally is that we've been pretty fortunate in that we haven't made too many mistakes. Everybody does. Anybody who owns a company with more than one employee does. But there's this kind of rule in social media and community management when you're, for instance, like we manage GoDaddy's social media. So if you're engaging with GoDaddy in social media, that's actually us you're talking to. Sometimes when somebody posts something really nasty about your brand, a lot of organizations, their first instinct is take it down because you have control of that. And unless it's completely just off the reservation, we oftentimes leave it up because the community will police itself within social. We have found that our company does a pretty similar thing. We've built a good enough foundation based on culture. I would say I wouldn't want to call us a values-based organization, but we are a culture-based organization. That our culture does a pretty good job of policing when we have challenges and having difficult conversations with their colleagues because we're also interdependent upon one another.
I'm afraid we're just about out of time. I want to thank the panel for being absolutely fantastic. And they will be around for the reception to further the discussion. And to close things out, the EO Learning Chair, Dave Singer, has just quick closing remarks.
When Cliff approached us about being partners in this event, it was really interesting because as entrepreneurs, our core values, our cultures are our true north. So they give us a starting place where we can make decisions based on. So I'm really happy that you put this together. Thanks so much, Cliff. And I also want to just say a little bit about Entrepreneurs Organization. We're a group of entrepreneurs based in St. Louis with a global organization all around the world, Asia, South America, and it's business owners in St. Louis that run businesses that do $1 million or more in revenue, and it's a place where we can all meet, learn, grow, and continue to do better. So if any of you are entrepreneurs and interested in our organization, I encourage you to seek us out and join. I can tell you it's been one of the best decisions that I've ever made. Thank you, and Shana Tova, enjoy the drinks.
Thank you. And last, just want to thank Marcy-Ann for everything she did in putting this together. She has just been a phenomenal manager of the Bauer Leadership Center, and we want to thank her wherever you are. Where are you, Marcy-Ann? Thank you for everything you've done, because she's the one that really put this together. So we'll see you all out at the reception. Thank you.